Mr. Harold Baxter had always been the kind of teacher who commanded absolute control over his classroom. Throughout his career, he was known for his firm, traditional teaching methods and an unwavering belief in discipline. He kept his classes silent, his students obedient, and his lesson plans strictly by the book. While his approach garnered respect from a few colleagues who admired his no-nonsense attitude, it also sparked concern among others who felt his methods were oppressive and outdated, designed more for control than for actual education. When Mr. Baxter joined Ridgewood High School, a well-regarded institution with a diverse student population and progressive teaching values, many wondered if his style would clash with the school's culture. Ridgewood was known for encouraging inclusivity, free thought, and a spirit of curiosity among its students. However, due to a shortage of experienced teachers, Mr. Baxter was hired despite reservations about his rigid teaching philosophy. For Mr. Baxter, this new environment was an unwelcome change. He disapproved of the school's progressive approach and quickly established himself as a force for order, often making comments about the importance of good behavior and respect for authority. From the very beginning, it was clear that Mr. Baxter wasn't going to adjust to Ridgewood's inclusive approach. He saw the school's openness as a weakness and was quick to shut down any student who dared to question his methods or the material he taught. Students quickly learned to stay quiet, fearing the wrath that often came with challenging him. However, he seemed to have a particular distaste for students from backgrounds different from his own, particularly those he viewed as unconventional or too outspoken. Then Ayanna joined his history class. Ayanna was a bright, ambitious young black student with a deep passion for history and a natural curiosity that often led her to ask questions. Her parents, both educators, had raised her to believe in the power of her voice and the value of her perspective. She was new to Ridgewood, eager to prove herself and share her thoughts in this new environment. But as soon as she started engaging in Mr. Baxter's class, it was as if she'd painted a target on herself. Mr. Baxter saw her confidence as a challenge to his authority and decided she needed to be put in her place. Unbeknownst to him, his choice to single her out would set off a chain of events he could never have predicted, leading to a reckoning that would shake the school to its core. 2. Targeting the new girl. Ayanna had always been the kind of student teachers loved, driven, inquisitive, and unafraid to ask difficult questions. She approached her studies with passion and a desire to learn, always volunteering answers and contributing to discussions. Her arrival at Ridgewood High was supposed to be a fresh start, an opportunity to make new friends and excel in a supportive environment. Her parents had prepared her for the transition, reminding her to be herself and encouraging her to participate actively in her classes. On her very first day in Mr. Baxter's class, Ayanna raised her hand during a discussion about civil rights, hoping to share a unique perspective. Mr. Baxter's reaction was immediate. He cut her off mid-sentence, his expression one of irritation. He dismissed her points as off-topic and moved on without acknowledging her further. Ayanna was taken aback but brushed it off, assuming he'd misunderstood her or was simply having a bad day. However, this pattern quickly became a routine. As the days turned into weeks, Mr. Baxter's attitude toward Ayanna grew colder. He began calling her out for the smallest things, arriving to class a minute late, speaking without raising her hand, even sighing too loudly. He took every opportunity to criticize her work, often nitpicking minor errors while ignoring the strong analysis or insights in her essays. When Ayanna asked for clarification, he would sigh dismissively, muttering about standards and how some students just don't understand what real rigor looks like. To her classmates, the disparity in treatment was painfully clear. Mr. Baxter rarely reprimanded other students, even those who clearly broke the rules he enforced so strictly on Ayanna. In group discussions, he would often disregard her contributions, pretending not to hear her or directing his questions to other students. Over time, Ayanna's confidence began to erode. She started questioning herself, wondering if she was truly out of line, if she was somehow failing to meet his expectations. The frustration and humiliation began to weigh on her, but she held her head high, determined not to let his behavior break her spirit. Meanwhile, her classmates began whispering among themselves. They saw Mr. Baxter's behavior for what it was: blatant discrimination disguised as discipline. They encouraged Ayanna to speak up, but she hesitated, afraid that complaining would only worsen the situation or mark her as a troublemaker. After all, Mr. Baxter was well-connected, respected by the administration, and known for his close ties to the district's older board members. He seemed untouchable, and Ayanna feared that challenging him would only lead to more suffering. 3. Microaggressions. Escalate. As time went on, Mr. Baxter's treatment of Ayanna shifted from subtle dismissiveness to overt hostility. No longer satisfied with merely ignoring her or nitpicking her work, he began making thinly veiled comments about her attitude and background. Whenever Ayanna offered a perspective that challenged his narrative, he would raise an eyebrow and say things like, "Maybe you're not quite understanding the point here," or, "Some people struggle with seeing things from a more nuanced perspective." These remarks, though seemingly innocent to an outsider, carried an undercurrent that Ayanna and her classmates couldn't ignore. The tension reached a boiling point during a class discussion on the civil rights movement. Ayanna, who had researched the topic extensively, brought up the contributions of Black women leaders, an aspect often overlooked in traditional narratives. Mr. Baxter listened with a patronizing smile before saying, "That's an interesting take, Ayanna, but maybe we should stick to more mainstream sources. We don't want to confuse anyone with fringe viewpoints." The entire class went silent, a collective shock rippling through the room. Ayanna felt her cheeks flush with anger and embarrassment, but she forced herself to remain calm, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her react. Her friends, outraged, exchanged glances, silently agreeing that this was going too far. They had heard enough comments, seen enough dismissive gestures, and witnessed enough unfair treatment to recognize Mr. Baxter's behavior as more than just strict teaching. It was targeted, personal, and undeniably discriminatory. That day, Ayanna's closest friends decided they couldn't stand by any longer. They began brainstorming ways to help Ayanna stand up to Mr. Baxter. They suggested she report him to the administration, but Ayanna was reluctant, fearing the consequences. Instead, her friends came up with a plan. They would start documenting his behavior, recording his comments, and gathering evidence to back up Ayanna's case. It was a risky move, but they were determined to expose the truth, hoping it would protect Ayanna and hold Mr. Baxter accountable for his actions. The following days were tense as Ayanna's friends discreetly recorded Mr. Baxter's remarks, capturing his demeaning comments and the tone he reserved specifically for Ayanna. The evidence they collected painted a clear picture of his bias and prejudice, a portrait of a man who used his authority to demean and belittle a student simply because she didn't fit his narrow definition of respectable. With each recording, their resolve grew stronger, and soon they were ready to take their findings to someone they trusted within the school. Ayanna's friends, frustrated and angry, realized that they couldn't just sit by and watch their friend suffer under Mr. Baxter's discriminatory treatment any longer. Ayanna had shared with them how each class felt like a trial she couldn't escape, her every action scrutinized and criticized without any clear justification. They knew Ayanna was a strong, capable person, but seeing her confidence erode over time was deeply troubling. They decided that if she was hesitant to report Mr. Baxter, they would find a way to support her by gathering concrete evidence of his behavior. It began with a few discreet recordings. Whenever Mr. Baxter would make one of his cutting remarks, Ayanna's friends would subtly record audio or take notes, documenting his words, tone, and the context in which he spoke. They noticed patterns that Ayanna hadn't even been fully aware of: how he would direct all challenging questions only toward her, refuse to acknowledge her correct answers, and often make comments that bordered on stereotypes, questioning her attitude and respect for authority. The more they gathered, the clearer it became that this wasn't an issue of simple misunderstanding or tough teaching. Mr. Baxter had a clear bias against Ayanna, and he wielded his authority as a tool to undermine her. One incident in particular made their mission feel even more urgent. During a group project presentation, Ayanna's team gave a well-researched and thought-provoking analysis on the role of Black activists during the civil rights movement. When it was time for feedback, Mr. Baxter didn't critique the content of their presentation, but instead focused on Ayana's lack of professionalism, criticizing her for dominating the conversation and suggesting she needed to work on showing respect to others' viewpoints. Ayana's teammates were stunned. Ayana had spoken no more than anyone else, and his feedback had nothing to do with the project's substance. It was clear to everyone in the room that his critique was unfounded and biased. Ayana's friends, increasingly outraged, realized they had to take action now. Gathering the recordings and notes, they approached the school's guidance counselor, Ms. Owens, someone they felt they could trust. Ms. Owens was known for being compassionate and understanding, a counselor who genuinely cared about her students' well-being and frequently went out of her way to advocate for them. Nervous but resolute, Ayana's friends explained the situation and played the recordings for her, laying out the pattern of Mr. Baxter's behavior. Ms. Owens listened intently, her expression growing more concerned with each recording. By the end, she had no doubt that Mr. Baxter's actions went beyond mere disciplinary tactics. They were part of a larger, deeply concerning pattern of discrimination. Ms. Owens thanked the students for their bravery and assured them that she would take their concerns seriously. She promised to escalate the matter to the principal immediately. As she gathered the evidence, she felt a swell of anger and protectiveness. She had always been proud of Ridgewood's diverse and inclusive environment, and knowing that a teacher was undermining that spirit with such blatant prejudice was intolerable. She also knew that Ayana was Principal Lawson's daughter, a fact the students didn't realize, and that this added another layer of urgency. Principal Lawson was known for her integrity and dedication to student welfare, and Ms. Owens was confident that she wouldn't let this matter go unresolved. With a determined heart, Ms. Owens set off to meet with Principal Lawson, setting into motion a plan that would bring Mr. Baxter's behavior to light in a way he could never have anticipated. Principal Lawson was a respected figure at Ridgewood High, admired for her commitment to creating an inclusive and safe environment for students and staff alike. She had always believed that every child deserved respect, support, and encouragement from their educators. The school's reputation for inclusivity was something she had worked hard to build, ensuring that students from all backgrounds felt seen, valued, and protected. When Ms. Owens came to her office and presented the recordings and reports detailing Mr. Baxter's behavior toward Ayana, she was stunned. Listening to the recordings, Principal Lawson's reaction went from shock to anger and finally to a grim determination. She could hear Mr. Baxter's tone, sharp, condescending, and dripping with disdain whenever he spoke to Ayana. He made comments that were thinly veiled as feedback, yet carried a clear undertone of bias. In one recording, he openly questioned her intelligence, saying, "Students like you often struggle with critical thinking." In another, he accused her of being disruptive simply for asking a question. The evidence was undeniable, and it was hard for Lawson to listen to it objectively, especially as it dawned on her that this student Mr. Baxter had singled out was her own daughter. Being both a mother and a principal placed her in a unique, but deeply painful position. She felt a powerful urge to protect Ayana, yet she knew she had to handle this matter with complete professionalism. If she acted impulsively or revealed her personal connection, it could compromise the credibility of the investigation, and she didn't want it to appear that Ayana's treatment was only unacceptable because she was her daughter. The truth was, Mr. Baxter's behavior was harmful and intolerable toward any student. Ayana's experience was part of a broader issue, and addressing it required careful planning. After a sleepless night filled with worry and resolve, Principal Lawson developed a plan that would allow her to observe Mr. Baxter's classroom without arousing suspicion. She decided to enter his class as an anonymous observer, posing as an academic colleague conducting an informal review of teaching methods. This would allow her to witness Mr. Baxter's behavior firsthand, giving her insight into how he conducted himself in the classroom when he didn't know he was being watched by someone who could hold him accountable. The next day, Principal Lawson donned a conservative disguise, glasses, a formal, understated suit, and her hair pulled back in a way that made her look markedly different from her usual self. She hoped that her appearance would make her unrecognizable to Mr. Baxter and to Ayana, whom she didn't want to disrupt or distress with her presence. She signed in as Dr. Helen Fields and carried a notebook to reinforce her cover story as an academic researcher. The school receptionist, in on the plan, directed her to Mr. Baxter's classroom, and with a pounding heart, she took a seat at the back of the room. Mr. Baxter began the class without much regard for the guest sitting in the back, acknowledging her presence only with a brief nod. He seemed confident, even self-assured, speaking to the students in a patronizing tone as he laid out the day's lesson on World War II. At first, Principal Lawson wondered if he might behave differently, perhaps softening his tone because of her presence. But as he settled into his routine, it became clear that this was the real Mr. Baxter, unfiltered and unguarded. She watched with a growing sense of outrage as he conducted the class, quick to dismiss any question that didn't align with his rigid narrative and belittling students who offered perspectives he deemed unimportant or irrelevant. When Ayanna raised her hand to ask a question about the role of African American soldiers in the war, Mr. Baxter barely looked at her, his expression immediately shifting to one of exasperation. He sighed audibly, muttering, "Well, let's stick to the basics, shall we?" before moving on to another student without allowing Ayanna to finish her question. Principal Lawson noted how his dismissive tone toward Ayanna contrasted sharply with his more encouraging responses to other students, especially those who looked more like him. Every time Ayanna contributed, he seemed intent on undermining her, as if her intelligence or perspective were inherently less valuable. The breaking point for Lawson came when Mr. Baxter made a snide remark, after Ayanna shared an insightful observation about the wartime economy and its impact on marginalized communities. Instead of acknowledging her point, he sneered, "It's fascinating how some people always try to make everything about race." The room fell silent, students exchanging uncomfortable glances, but Mr. Baxter carried on as if he hadn't just disrespected Ayanna in front of her peers. Principal Lawson's heart ached as she watched her daughter's face, a mixture of frustration and pain as she held back, refusing to react visibly to the humiliation. Lawson spent the rest of the class quietly observing, her notebook filling with instances of Mr. Baxter's biased behavior. She watched him ignore Ayanna's raised hand multiple times, even when she was the only student volunteering to answer a question. She noted how he would engage other students in friendly, encouraging tones, while his interactions with Ayanna were consistently cold, distant, and filled with passive aggression. It was clear that he saw her as a nuisance, an obstacle to his version of order and discipline, and he wielded his authority to make her feel unwelcome and small. When the bell finally rang, marking the end of class, Principal Lawson stood up, her heart racing. She knew she couldn't confront Mr. Baxter immediately, not without jeopardizing the careful plan she had crafted. Instead, she waited until the students had left before approaching him, maintaining her cover as Dr. Fields. She thanked him politely for allowing her to observe his class, forcing a neutral tone despite the anger simmering inside her. Mr. Baxter seemed indifferent, almost bored, as he brushed off her thanks and proceeded to gather his belongings, unaware of the storm brewing. As Lawson walked back to her office, she felt both a sense of sorrow for what Ayanna had endured and a fierce resolve to hold Mr. Baxter accountable. She knew that a formal investigation would be the next step, and she was prepared to follow through without hesitation. No student should ever feel targeted or marginalized in a place meant for learning and growth. With the recordings, her own observations, and the support of Ms. Owens, Principal Lawson began planning the steps that would finally bring justice, not only for Ayanna, but for any student who had ever felt silenced or belittled in her school. With her plan in place, Principal Lawson felt a mixture of determination and dread as she prepared for her second day as Dr. Fields, the anonymous academic observer. The day after her initial observation, she returned to Mr. Baxter's classroom, fully aware that her previous visit had only scratched the surface of his discriminatory treatment. The recordings, the students' testimonies, and her own notes from the first observation had painted a troubling picture, but she needed to be absolutely certain she'd seen everything. She wanted to catch him in his routine behavior, the way he treated Ayanna and other marginalized students when he thought no one important was watching. Her goal was to build an indisputable case against him, one that he couldn't refute or downplay. As she entered the classroom for the second time, she could feel the weight of her dual roles pressing down on her: principal and mother, protector and judge. It wasn't easy to sit at the back of that room and watch her daughter endure such blatant disrespect. But she steeled herself, reminding herself that her intervention would protect Ayanna and potentially other students facing similar mistreatment. Today, her presence was a silent promise. She was there not only as an administrator but also as a mother determined to right a wrong. Mr. Baxter began his lesson with his usual rigid demeanor, a disinterested greeting thrown at the students as he turned to the board to outline the day's topic. Today's discussion was on the Great Depression and its social impact, a complex subject that invited multiple perspectives, and was often taught with a focus on understanding different communities' experiences. Lawson braced herself, knowing how often Ayanna enjoyed sharing her views on historical events that intersected with social justice topics. She could already sense how Mr. Baxter would respond to any contributions from Ayanna that didn't fit his narrative. As expected, Ayanna raised her hand, her voice clear and steady as she introduced a point about the economic hardships faced by African American communities during the Depression. Mr. Baxter's reaction was swift and dismissive, his expression one of impatience as he said, "Let's keep things simple, Ayanna. Not everything has to be about race." He shot her a patronizing look, as if she were a child who had missed the obvious. The subtle snickers from a few other students, ones who had learned to mirror his attitude, only added to the sting. Lawson felt her chest tighten. The phrase, "not everything has to be about race," echoed in her mind, a reminder of all the ways her daughter's voice had been minimized, reduced to something lesser by this man's prejudiced perspective. It was a phrase Ayanna had likely heard before, a tactic used to silence her experiences and viewpoints. As the class continued, she watched Ayanna's expression shift to one of forced composure, her shoulders tensing as she maintained her dignity under Mr. Baxter's scrutiny. But Mr. Baxter wasn't done. Later in the lesson, he called on Ayanna specifically to answer a question that had little to do with the topic at hand, clearly expecting her to struggle. When she hesitated for a moment, caught off guard by the unrelated question, he smirked and said, "I thought so. Maybe you should focus more on the actual lesson instead of getting distracted with side issues." The remark was pointed, his tone condescending, and the class fell silent, the tension palpable. Ayanna, clearly fighting to maintain her composure, responded with a calm answer, but it was clear to everyone that she was hurt. Principal Lawson noted every word, every glance, every pause. She recorded his treatment of Ayanna's classmates as well, noting how his interactions with other students were far more respectful, even friendly. When a white male student asked a question that challenged the main points of the lesson, Mr. Baxter listened attentively, nodding in consideration before responding thoughtfully. But when Ayanna raised a similar point, his demeanor shifted, his patience wearing thin as he cut her off. As the class neared its end, Mr. Baxter launched into a small lecture on respecting authority, casting a pointed look at Ayanna and a few other students who had dared to ask questions he deemed inappropriate. He talked about how some students just don't know their place, and implied that students who challenged him were disruptive to the learning environment. It was a speech Lawson had likely heard before, but hearing it directed at her daughter and others in the room who shared Ayanna's background filled her with a controlled fury. When the bell rang, Principal Lawson watched as Ayanna gathered her things, her movements slow, her face showing a mixture of disappointment and frustration. It broke Lawson's heart to see her daughter affected in this way, but it also reaffirmed her resolve. Today she had witnessed firsthand not only Mr. Baxter's prejudice, but the impact it had on Ayanna's self-esteem and sense of belonging. With the students gone, Lawson remained seated, waiting until Mr. Baxter noticed her. When he finally turned and acknowledged her, she felt a surge of calm determination. She approached him with a polite expression, still wearing her Dr. Fields disguise, and thanked him for allowing her to observe his teaching methods. Mr. Baxter looked indifferent, offering only a curt nod as he gathered his notes, clearly eager to leave. To him, she was just another irrelevant academic who didn't understand the challenges of real-world classroom management. But as Principal Lawson left his classroom, her mind was racing with a plan. She had collected ample evidence, not only from her observations, but also from the recordings provided by Ayana's friends and the testimonies they'd given. She knew that confronting Mr. Baxter directly, especially while disguised, would have been satisfying, but wouldn't have accomplished her goal. Instead, she intended to pursue a formal investigation, one that would leave Mr. Baxter accountable not just to her, but to the entire school board and administration. Back in her office, Lawson drafted her report with careful detail, including every instance of Mr. Baxter's discriminatory behavior she had observed or recorded. She cited specific examples, capturing his exact words and tone, and provided context for how his actions had affected Ayana and other students. She contacted the school board's ethics committee, setting up a meeting to discuss the evidence she had gathered. She knew that with her detailed documentation and the support of Ms. Owens, they had a strong case. Sitting back after finishing the report, Principal Lawson felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and relief. She knew this wouldn't be an easy battle. Mr. Baxter had connections, and she anticipated resistance. But for the sake of her daughter and every other student who had suffered under his bias, she was prepared to see it through to the end. Principal Lawson's plan was moving forward, and after documenting everything, she arranged a formal review meeting with the school board, intending to present her findings and initiate the necessary disciplinary action against Mr. Baxter. But before that official step, she wanted to confront Mr. Baxter directly, this time not as an anonymous observer, but as herself, Ridgewood High's principal and Ayana's mother. She wanted him to understand the gravity of his actions, to feel the weight of the harm he had caused, especially now that his actions were no longer hidden in the shadows of his classroom. The day of the reveal, Principal Lawson walked into Mr. Baxter's classroom unannounced, just as his class was about to end. She wore her usual professional attire, her hair down, looking every bit the authoritative figure that students and staff alike respected. She waited patiently by the door, arms crossed, as Mr. Baxter finished his final lecture points. Her presence didn't go unnoticed. Several students exchanged curious glances, whispering to each other, wondering why the principal was there. When the bell rang, Mr. Baxter dismissed the class, but Principal Lawson stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Mr. Baxter, if you don't mind, I'd like to have a word with you before you leave," she said, her tone carrying an unmistakable air of authority. Mr. Baxter looked up, surprised but not concerned. He likely assumed it was a routine administrative check, or perhaps a compliment on his teaching style. He nodded, appearing slightly smug as he turned to face her, confident in his standing. The students, sensing something unusual, lingered, hesitating by the door and casting glances back toward the front of the room. Ayana was among them, frozen in place, surprised and slightly confused by her mother's presence. She hadn't expected this confrontation to happen here, in the classroom, and she couldn't hide the shock on her face. Principal Lawson gave her daughter a small nod, a subtle reassurance, before she began. Without any preamble, Principal Lawson introduced herself fully. "Mr. Baxter, I believe you know me as Principal Lawson. However, what you may not realize is that I'm also Ayana's mother." The revelation hit him like a physical blow, and she could see his face shift from smug confidence to uneasy shock. His eyes widened slightly, and his posture stiffened as the realization dawned on him. "Over the past few weeks," Lawson continued, her voice steady but carrying a steely edge, "I have observed numerous instances of your biased behavior toward Ayana, and by extension, other students in your classroom. I've heard your dismissive tone, your unfair critiques, and the unprofessional remarks you've made that cross the line of acceptable classroom conduct." She glanced at Ayana and then back at Mr. Baxter, her eyes unwavering. "I've also personally witnessed your attempts to undermine her intelligence and diminish her contributions, all under the guise of discipline." Mr. Baxter, visibly rattled, tried to compose himself, attempting to regain control. With all due respect, Principal Lawson, I think there might be some misunderstanding here, he stammered. I merely enforce strict academic standards and I treat all my students with equal expectations. Principal Lawson held up her hand to silence him. I'm afraid that excuse doesn't hold up, Mr. Baxter. I have multiple recordings, detailed testimonies from students, and first-hand observations from my time in your classroom, which was part of an investigation into your conduct. Your so-called discipline disproportionately affects students like Ayanna, targeting them with comments and critiques that have nothing to do with their academic performance. This isn't about enforcing standards, it's about your clear bias. Students still lingering by the door watched, spellbound. Whispers spread among them as they realized the weight of what was happening. Mr. Baxter, the teacher who always seemed untouchable, was finally being held accountable. The students who had witnessed his unfair treatment of Ayanna, who had felt powerless to stop it, were now seeing justice unfold right in front of them. Mr. Baxter, realizing that denying his behavior would be futile, shifted his tactic, trying to appear contrite. I assure you, Principal Lawson, if I have unknowingly crossed a line, it was never intentional, he said, attempting to sound apologetic. I would never want any student to feel uncomfortable. Principal Lawson's expression hardened. She wasn't swayed by his attempt at damage control. Unintentional or not, the effect remains the same. Your actions have damaged the confidence and well-being of several students in this class, students who trusted that their teacher would treat them fairly. This isn't just a matter of poor judgment, Mr. Baxter. It's a pattern of discriminatory behavior that goes against the values of Ridgewood High. She paused, letting her words settle, then continued, her voice firm. Effective immediately, you are suspended from your duties, pending a full investigation by the school board. You will not be permitted to return to the classroom until this matter is resolved. Her voice carried a finality that left no room for argument. The class, now completely silent, took in the gravity of the moment. Mr. Baxter's face paled, his expression one of barely concealed panic as he grasped the reality of his situation. The students, especially Ayanna's friends who had helped gather the evidence, exchanged looks of quiet satisfaction, their efforts validated by the principal's decisive action. As Mr. Baxter gathered his belongings, visibly shaken, Principal Lawson turned her attention to the students. She addressed them directly, her tone softening as she spoke. To all of you, I want to apologize for any distress or discomfort you may have experienced. My goal as your principal is to make sure every one of you feels respected and valued, and I promise you that we will be taking steps to ensure that this kind of behavior has no place in our school. Her gaze settled on Ayanna, giving her daughter a look filled with pride and reassurance. Ayanna, who had been silent throughout the confrontation, nodded, her expression one of relief mixed with gratitude. She knew that her mother's intervention had not only protected her, but had also sent a powerful message to the entire school. This was a turning point, one that would inspire change and empower other students to speak up against unfair treatment. With Mr. Baxter's exit from the classroom, Ridgewood High had taken its first step toward healing, setting a precedent for justice and accountability. The students, seeing their principal's commitment to protecting them, felt a renewed sense of trust in the school's leadership. They had witnessed firsthand that their voices mattered and that there were adults in their lives who would stand up for them, even against those in positions of power. For Ayanna, this moment was deeply empowering. She had felt helpless for so long, forced to endure Mr. Baxter's discrimination, and now finally, she felt a sense of vindication. Her mother's firm but fair response restored her confidence, reminding her of the strength and resilience she possessed. And while this chapter was closing, Ayanna knew that her journey of advocating for fairness and equity was just beginning, both for herself and for others who might face similar challenges. The news of Mr. Baxter's suspension spread through Ridgewood High like wildfire. Students whispered about it in the hallways, shared details on social media, and discussed the confrontation in hushed tones before class. For many, it was an affirmation of their long-held frustrations and an overdue acknowledgement of the experiences some had endured quietly under his rigid, biased rule. Mr. Baxter, The teacher who had once seemed untouchable had finally been held accountable. This news brought a mix of emotions: relief, satisfaction, and a renewed sense of trust in the administration. For those who had directly witnessed or experienced his discriminatory behavior, it felt like a long-awaited justice. For Ayanna, however, the fallout was bittersweet. While she felt a powerful sense of validation seeing her mother and the school take such decisive action, she also had to navigate the mixed emotions of her classmates. Some students approached her in solidarity, sharing stories of their own struggles in Mr. Baxter's class and expressing relief that he had been held accountable. Friends, both old and new, offered her words of support, and Ayanna felt buoyed by the sense of community that had formed in the wake of Mr. Baxter's departure. Yet, there were others who viewed the situation with skepticism or resentment, whispering that Ayanna had been treated favorably because of her mother's position as principal. Rumors began circulating that Lawson's decision to suspend Mr. Baxter was more about family loyalty than justice. Some students argued that Mr. Baxter's teaching style, while strict, was merely a product of his high standards. These critics claimed that his suspension was an overreaction, that Ayanna had misinterpreted his discipline as discrimination. In the face of this backlash, Ayanna's confidence wavered. She wondered if some students had genuinely believed Mr. Baxter's biases were simply tough love, or if they were uncomfortable with the idea that someone in power could face consequences. Despite the support of her close friends, who continued to rally around her, Ayanna found herself questioning whether speaking up had truly been worth it. She struggled with the pressure of knowing that her actions had set off a chain of events that disrupted not only her own life, but also that of her classmates. Meanwhile, Principal Lawson faced her own share of challenges. Although the school board had initially supported her decision to suspend Mr. Baxter, there was resistance from certain board members who had long-standing relationships with him. They argued that he was a respected educator with a record of high academic results, and claimed that Lawson's personal involvement as Ayanna's mother might have clouded her judgment. One board member went so far as to suggest that Mr. Baxter deserved another chance, pointing out that his style had, in some ways, kept students in line and ensured a disciplined environment. Lawson, however, stood her ground firmly, emphasizing that no academic results could justify a teacher's discriminatory behavior. She attended multiple meetings with the board, presenting the evidence she had gathered, including her first-hand observations, the recordings provided by Ayanna's friends, and testimonies from other students. She argued that Mr. Baxter's suspension was not a matter of personal bias, but a necessary step to protect the well-being of all students at Ridgewood High. She reminded the board that Ridgewood was built on principles of respect, equality, and support for every student, regardless of their background, and that tolerating Mr. Baxter's actions would undermine those values. The pressure mounted as the board deliberated on whether Mr. Baxter's suspension would become a termination. Tensions ran high in the school community as parents, students, and staff members took sides, some advocating for Mr. Baxter's return, while others called for his permanent removal. Lawson received anonymous notes of support from some faculty members who thanked her for her courage, expressing that they too had noticed Mr. Baxter's problematic behavior, but had felt powerless to address it. On the other hand, some staff members, particularly those who shared his traditionalist views, subtly questioned Lawson's leadership, hinting that her decision was a personal vendetta rather than an act of fairness. As the weeks passed, Lawson continued to focus on ensuring that Ridgewood High became an even safer, more inclusive environment. She organized workshops on cultural sensitivity and implicit bias, inviting guest speakers and educators who specialized in these areas. Ayanna, encouraged by her friends and seeing the broader impact of her experience, attended these sessions and became actively involved in the discussions. Her own story became a powerful example of the challenges students of color often face, even in environments that pride themselves on inclusivity. Through her involvement, Ayanna found herself gradually healing, her confidence slowly returning. She noticed other students becoming more open about sharing their experiences and concerns, inspired by her bravery. Ayana was asked by the student council to speak about her experience and the importance of standing up for oneself, even when it feels daunting. Although nervous, Ayana accepted the invitation, seeing it as an opportunity to reclaim her voice and inspire others. On the day of her talk, the school auditorium was filled with students and teachers alike, all eager to hear Ayana's perspective. Taking a deep breath, she spoke about the struggle of feeling isolated, the courage it took to speak out, and the support she had received from friends and family. She shared how difficult it had been to withstand the backlash, the doubt, and the rumors, but also how grateful she was for those who had believed in her and fought alongside her. Her speech was met with a standing ovation, and in that moment, Ayana felt a profound sense of closure. Finally, the board reached its decision. In a closed meeting, they voted to terminate Mr. Baxter's employment, concluding that his behavior was indeed in violation of Ridgewood High's standards of conduct. The evidence was compelling and left little room for argument. His actions had harmed students, and his presence was no longer compatible with the school's mission. Principal Lawson received the news with quiet satisfaction, feeling that justice had been served. Ridgewood High was now one step closer to becoming the environment she had always envisioned, a place where every student could thrive without fear of discrimination. As the announcement of Mr. Baxter's official departure spread, there was a palpable shift in the school's atmosphere. Students felt empowered to report issues they had previously been hesitant to address, knowing that the administration would take their concerns seriously. Ayana's courage had set a precedent, inspiring a culture of accountability and respect. For Principal Lawson, the experience reinforced her commitment to her students. The challenges she had faced, both as a leader and as a mother, had tested her resolve, but the outcome reaffirmed her dedication to creating a supportive and inclusive school community. And for Ayana, the journey had been transformative. She emerged stronger, more resilient, and more determined than ever to advocate for herself and others. In the end, the fallout from Mr. Baxter's departure brought about a deeper change within Ridgewood High, setting in motion a series of positive reforms that would benefit students for years to come. Ayana knew that her battle had been difficult, but she also understood that her voice had made a difference, not only for herself, but for everyone who might face similar challenges in the future. With Mr. Baxter's departure, Ridgewood High began a new chapter, one marked by a commitment to equity, respect, and accountability. Principal Lawson saw an opportunity to make lasting changes, not just within the school's policies but also in the culture among students and staff. She held a series of open forums where students could share their experiences anonymously or in person, creating a safe space for them to discuss issues they had previously felt unable to voice. These forums brought forward a diverse array of stories, from microaggressions in classrooms to misunderstandings that teachers and students alike had experienced. The school's administration took these discussions to heart, seeing them as an invaluable resource for understanding and addressing the real challenges that students faced every day. Inspired by Ayana's courage and the powerful stories shared in the forums, Lawson formed a new Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion (DEI) committee that included students, teachers, and members of the community. Ayana and several of her friends who had stood by her during the difficult times with Mr. Baxter were invited to join the committee as student representatives. Ayana was initially hesitant. She had already been through so much, but after discussing it with her friends and seeing their enthusiasm, she decided to accept. She felt a deep sense of responsibility to use her experience to help others and to contribute to the changes being implemented at Ridgewood. The committee quickly became a driving force in the school's new initiatives. They held workshops on empathy and cultural sensitivity for both students and staff, developed by educators and experts who specialized in fostering inclusive environments. Teachers were encouraged to attend sessions on recognizing implicit biases, and students were invited to participate in workshops focused on understanding and celebrating differences. The committee also worked on creating a system where students could report concerns confidentially, with assurances that each report would be taken seriously and addressed with respect and care. Ayana, now a confident and active member of the DEI committee, took on a leadership role in organizing student discussions and events. One of the committee's first major projects was Voices of Ridgewood, an event designed to give students a platform to share their personal stories through art, poetry, and spoken word. Ayanna and her friends poured their energy into organizing the event, working tirelessly to make it a memorable experience. They promoted the event throughout the school, encouraging students of all backgrounds to participate and share their unique perspectives. On the night of Voices of Ridgewood, the school's auditorium was packed. Students, parents, teachers, and community members came together to support the performers and to listen to their stories. Ayanna took the stage and shared her own journey, recounting the challenges she had faced with Mr. Baxter and the strength she had found in her friends and family. She spoke about the importance of standing up for oneself and the power of a supportive community, her voice steady and filled with a confidence that had only grown through her experiences. Her speech resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom had followed her story and felt inspired by her resilience. As Ayanna finished speaking, the audience erupted in applause, showing her that her journey had touched them in ways she hadn't anticipated. Other students shared their experiences as well, stories of identity, resilience, and self-discovery. They spoke about struggles with stereotypes, pressures to conform, and the ways they had found strength in their cultures, families, and friendships. Each performance was a reminder of the school's diversity, its collective strength, and the unique beauty each student brought to Ridgewood. As the event concluded, students left the auditorium with a sense of unity and pride, feeling more connected to one another than ever before. Voices of Ridgewood became an annual tradition, a celebration of the school's commitment to inclusivity and understanding. For Principal Lawson, the success of the DEI committee and the positive feedback from students and parents alike were proof that the challenges she had faced with Mr. Baxter's case had been worth it. Her leadership had transformed the school, fostering an environment where every student felt they belonged. She had taken a personal struggle and turned it into a catalyst for change, ensuring that Ridgewood High would be a place where students could thrive without fear of discrimination or prejudice. The changes at Ridgewood High also had a ripple effect beyond the school. Other schools in the district took notice of Ridgewood's new policies and initiatives, with several principals reaching out to Lawson for guidance on implementing similar programs. The school's success story began to draw attention at district meetings, sparking discussions on the importance of DEI initiatives in all schools. Ridgewood became a model for inclusion, proving that diversity and respect were essential to fostering a healthy learning environment. Ayanna continued to grow from her experiences, embracing her role as a voice for change. She joined the student council and worked alongside her peers to ensure that student voices were represented in all major school decisions. She also became a mentor to younger students, many of whom looked up to her as an example of resilience and courage. Ayanna's friends, who had stood by her through the challenges, remained her closest allies, working with her on council projects and DEI events. Their friendship had deepened through shared struggles, and together, they became advocates for fairness, kindness, and mutual respect in their school. The impact of Ayanna's journey extended into her future as well. When she graduated, she spoke at the ceremony, delivering a powerful message about the importance of using one's voice, especially when it feels difficult. Her speech was met with a standing ovation from her classmates, teachers, and family. Many in the audience knew how much she had endured, and they applauded not only her success but also the spirit of transformation she had ignited within Ridgewood High. Years later, Ayanna would look back on her time at Ridgewood with gratitude, recognizing that the hardships she had faced had shaped her into a strong, compassionate leader. Her mother's support, her friends' loyalty, and the school's dedication to justice had all contributed to her journey. Ridgewood High had been a place of growth for her, not just academically, but personally, and she knew that her experiences there had prepared her for a life dedicated to making a difference in her community. In the end, what began as an unjust situation became a story of resilience, empowerment, and profound change, marking a new era for Ridgewood High, a place where every student's voice was heard, valued, and celebrated. As Ridgewood High moved forward, the impact of the events surrounding Ayanna and Mr. Baxter's departure reverberated throughout the community, establishing a legacy of empowerment and advocacy for fairness that continued to shape the school for years. The changes initiated by Principal Lawson and the DEI committee set a powerful example for students, teachers, and even the broader district, leaving an indelible mark on the school's culture. One of the first long-term changes was the integration of annual inclusivity workshops, which became an essential part of both the teacher and student experience. These workshops were designed to address biases, celebrate diversity, and cultivate empathy. Teachers shared experiences, discussed challenges, and learned effective strategies for creating inclusive classrooms, while students participated in interactive sessions that encouraged understanding and open-mindedness. Ayanna, who continued her advocacy even after graduating, returned as a guest speaker each year, inspiring new classes of students with her journey and reminding them of the importance of standing up for what is right. Her story became one of the cornerstones of the inclusivity workshops, and incoming students often heard of her courage before even meeting her. Additionally, Ridgewood High established a yearly scholarship in Ayanna's name, the Ayanna Lawson Resilience Scholarship. Funded through donations from alumni, teachers, and local businesses, the scholarship was awarded to students who demonstrated exceptional leadership in promoting inclusion and unity within the school community. Each year, a graduating senior who had shown resilience in the face of adversity was honored with the scholarship, receiving both financial support for their college journey and public recognition for their contributions to Ridgewood. The scholarship ceremony became a treasured event for the school, with past recipients often returning to share how Ayanna's story had inspired them. The DEI committee also began hosting monthly dialogue circles, where students and teachers could come together to discuss social issues, address concerns, and brainstorm solutions. These circles, which were facilitated by trained staff members, created a safe space for students to express themselves freely, knowing their voices would be heard and respected. The circles encouraged students to share experiences of bias, explore ways to improve the school environment, and collectively work towards solutions. The atmosphere at Ridgewood High began to transform as these circles fostered stronger connections, mutual respect, and a deeper sense of community. Ayanna's friends, who had stood by her side during the conflict with Mr. Baxter, continued to play pivotal roles in the school's evolution. Many of them joined the DEI committee in leadership positions, dedicating their time to initiatives like peer mentoring, anti-bullying programs, and awareness campaigns. Emily, one of Ayanna's closest allies, took charge of the peer mentoring program, pairing upperclassmen with freshmen, to help ease the transition into high school. She often told the new students, "We're here to support each other, no matter where we come from or what we believe." Jordan, another friend who had gathered evidence against Mr. Baxter, spearheaded an annual diversity fair that celebrated the cultural backgrounds of Ridgewood students through art, music, food, and performances. Principal Lawson, reflecting on everything that had transpired, felt immense pride in the positive changes that had come from such a challenging experience. Her role as both an administrator and a mother had been tested, but she had come through with a renewed sense of purpose. She remained a vocal advocate for equity, often speaking at district-wide events about the importance of creating inclusive environments in every school. Her leadership became a model for other administrators, and Ridgewood High was frequently highlighted in district meetings as a success story in transforming adversity into growth. Lawson knew that her dedication to Ayanna and to the school's values had ultimately reshaped Ridgewood, turning it into a safer, stronger place for future students. For Ayanna, the journey from victim of discrimination to a symbol of resilience had been transformative. As she grew older, she continued to advocate for equality, using her voice to support others and inspire those who faced similar challenges. She remained in touch with Ridgewood, often mentoring students and giving talks at local community centers, sharing her experiences and encouraging young people to speak out against injustice. She had discovered a profound purpose through her experiences at Ridgewood, and she carried that purpose with her into her career, becoming a civil rights attorney dedicated to defending those who felt powerless. Over time, the story of Ayanna and Mr. Baxter became part of Ridgewood's history, an example of both the harm that unchecked authority could inflict and the incredible strength that a united community could wield in response. Her story was retold each year, especially to new students who arrived at Ridgewood, showing them the importance of empathy, courage, and accountability. Ayanna's experience helped them understand that Ridgewood High was a place where every student's voice mattered, a place that would protect them, stand by them, and honor their perspectives. Looking back, Ayanna felt gratitude for the friends who had supported her, the principal who had fought for her, and the school that had embraced her journey and made it a part of its identity. What began as a dark and painful chapter had turned into a story of growth, one that continued to inspire not just Ridgewood, but the entire community surrounding it. Ridgewood High had been tested, and it had emerged stronger, more compassionate, and more committed to justice than ever before. In the years that followed, Ridgewood's motto evolved, reflecting the lessons learned through Ayanna's story. Strength in diversity, power in unity. For Ayanna, for Principal Lawson, and for the countless students and teachers impacted by their courage, this new legacy would stand as a lasting testament to the power of standing up, speaking out, and creating change together.